Well, it is a critical day, really, for the future of the president's reelection effort. We are going to see President Joe Biden holding a news conference tonight.
And as you all likely know by now, this appearance comes as more close allies of Biden are pushing for him to drop out of the race and allow another candidate to step forward. So far, 10 House Democrats and 1 Senate Democrat have directly called on the president to exit the race.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer released a statement Wednesday night addressing the calls for Biden to step aside, saying, quote, "As I have made clear repeatedly, publicly and privately, I support President Biden and remain committed to ensuring Donald Trump is defeated in November."
Now, we have team coverage for you on this afternoon, and Nancy Cordes, as you see on the left, is standing by at the White House. But first, let's get to CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion, bringing us reaction from Washington. And Nikole, as we've mentioned, we're now hearing from at least 1 Democratic senator calling for Biden to drop out. Why is this significant and more than just chatter that we heard immediately following the debate?
Well, so far, many Senate Democrats have been holding their fire, so it is significant that now Peter Welch has become the first Democratic senator to call on the president to step down. He put this in a Washington Post op-ed, in essence saying, you know, we can't unsee what we saw in the debate. But I would note, too, that on the House side, we continue to see defections, and the latest being Congresswoman Hillary Scholten, who is a frontline member. She just moments ago announced that she believes that the president should step aside, arguing that it's important to put forth the strongest candidate possible, someone who can not only win, but also govern.
How is this divide within the Democratic Party affecting both their messaging to voters and the navigation in terms of how they're moving forward?
Well, I think for now, a lot of that messaging is, you know, they're treading water. What a number of Democrats keep telling us is they're trying to turn the conversation to the best of their ability back to the former president and the importance of defeating him, saying very little as they can about the president, but again, kind of focusing on defeating former President Donald Trump, continuing to make the case that democracy is at stake, and continuing to point, for instance, to this Project 2025 that some of his aides have drafted as a possible plan in terms of how a second Trump term may operate. So, those things they say are critical to defeat. That is why they continue to argue that Democrats have to win in November, but still making that argument by keeping arm's length from the president right now.
And Nikole, Team Biden need to win over delegates, especially ahead of the Democratic convention next month. I understand that some calls have been made from the president directly to them amid all this. What can you tell us about that?
Well, look, at this point, the president has to shore up support wherever he can, and we've seen that across the board, whether that was meeting with labor leaders this week, obviously, calling members of Congress here, speaking, for instance, with the Congressional Black Caucus. As you know, I'm standing right now outside of the DSCC, which is the campaign arm for Senate Democrats, where we expect a trio of Biden campaign advisors to brief senators ahead of that. Jen O'Malley Dillon, the campaign manager, has already put out a memo saying that the campaign realizes they are clear-eyed about what happened during this debate, but at the same time, they continue to argue that the numbers they're seeing shows this race as a toss-up. So I imagine that could be some of the argument that they make to the Senate Democrats, hoping to stem any more potential defections.
All right, Nikole Killion with the latest for us there from Washington. Thank you.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is there for us. So, Nancy, let's talk about tonight's press conference. How high are these stakes for President Biden?
The stakes are quite high because there are Democrats who are basically watching everything he does, every unscripted event over the past 2 weeks, to get a sense of whether what they saw at the debate 2 weeks ago was an isolated incident or whether it's an indication of a fraying of his ability to appear in an extemporaneous setting. And so the stakes are high, and the biggest challenge for this White House is that if he has a good press conference, there are still going to be many Democrats who say, OK, well, that went fine, but what about the next one? Whereas if he has a bad moment, a question that gets poorly answered. There are critics in his party who will say, see, this is exactly why I have concerns. So that's the ongoing challenge for the White House. They are trying to downplay the stakes by arranging for him to go to Michigan tomorrow, put him back out on the campaign trail. He's doing a network interview on Monday, and basically the argument they're going to make is he's plowing forward regardless.
Speak to us more about that strategy by the campaign, Nancy, because I think earlier this week on Monday you had mentioned that you had not seen a time when the president had called into a cable channel like Morning Joe, kind of off the cuff, to speak on his behalf and defend against these allegations that he's too old or frail. What's the significance of next week's additional network interview? What is the strategy from the campaign?
Right. I mean, the president hasn't done that many sit-down network television interviews in 4 years. And now suddenly he's doing an interview with Lester Holt of NBC News about 9 days after doing an interview with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News. So basically, part of the strategy appears to be, hey, you know, watch how he does in this next event and this next event, and sort of hope that by the time that interview takes place, that the attention of the political world won't be that focused on the president anyway, that people will be paying more attention to the Republican National Convention that is set to get underway in Milwaukee next week, where former President Trump is expected to announce his running mate.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, or rather, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but let's also talk about the fact that all of the NATO leaders are actually there in Washington, D.C. Do we have any insight into how all of this churn in the Democratic Party is being viewed on the international stage?
Well, you can imagine that it's something that is on the minds of many of the world leaders who are getting the first opportunity in a few weeks or longer, depending on which country they are from, to see President Biden face to face and make their own assessments. And in fact, just today, the president of Finland, which was recently admitted into NATO in large part because of the urging of President Biden, kind of returned the favor. And he said that he's been around President Biden a number of times in the past 48 hours, and he didn't see anything that would give him concerns about the president's stamina, his focus, his intellect, or anything else. And so, you know, that is an interesting sidebar going on here, is that these world leaders, the members of their delegations, they're also gathering their own impressions, talking to journalists from their own home countries. And so you would imagine both this week, but also as time goes on, we'll learn a little bit more about their impressions and what they experience behind the scenes.
And just in our last few seconds, Nancy, you know, beyond the wrapping up of NATO and this key press conference, which I believe is at 6:30 p.m., what else is on the president's schedule today?
You know, he's had a really packed day. It's hard to see how he's going to get much prep time in for this press conference, because he's got 3 or 4 big working sessions where he's going to be sitting down with other NATO leaders on a variety of topics, and he's sitting down with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. So it is really a packed day that began at 10 o'clock this morning at NATO.
All right, Nancy Cordes there for us at the White House. Thanks, Nancy.